you imagine what it was like to be a leper? To be infected with a deadly disease and forced to live out in the countryside. To be cut off from your family with no way of making a living. And to be forced to warn the passerbys of your presence as they were walking by or riding by in their little wagons, yelling out, "Unclean! Unclean!" I think I read a book that I think gave me a tiny glimpse into this world of social lepers. The book was called Catch Me If You Can by Frank Abagnale. You may have seen the movie with the same name, Catch Me If You Can. It was produced by Steven Spielberg and it starred Leo DiCaprio. Abagnale was one of the world's most famous con men. Y'all remember this story? And he cashed over $2 million in fraudulent checks. And the most astounding thing about his criminal career, it really wasn't that as he was successful in cashing fraudulent checks. It was his success as posing as like airline pilots and attorneys and college professors and physicians. He just played the role of whoever he wanted to. But while I was fascinated by his misdeeds, I was also fascinated to see what happened when he was finally caught. He made the mistake of going to France to retire from his life of crime, and an Air France stewardess recognized him, and he soon found himself in a French jail cell. And he learned too late about French jails. They stripped him naked and threw him in a cell with no cot, no toilet, no wash basin, and no light. And the sole piece of furniture in his cell was a bucket. A bucket that wasn't often emptied. He was allowed no visitors, no phone calls, no contact with the outside world. I'm sure that a first century leper could have sympathized with his situation. But I was also interested to see what happened when he finally got released from prison. You know, except for an occasional minimum wage job, he couldn't find any work. And when he did find a job, people would often groom him for better things, and then they'd discover he had a criminal record, and he'd get fired. He would be back on the street, looking for a job, any job. It was a terrible time in his life. But then he realized that his life of crime had prepared him to advise banks and other companies about ways to prevent theft. So he began a consulting business. And not many former prisoners are able to recover that well. You know, most are limited to low-paying menial work. And many never recover anything that would give them anything like a normal life. Unclean. Unclean. Lepers had to warn passerbys lest the passerby accidentally touch the leper and become infected. Now, as Jesus entered a village on the border of Galilee and Samaria, 10 lepers shouted another greeting. "Jesus, Master," they cried, "have pity on us." You know, that was the leper's last hope, wasn't it? Pity. Some translations use the word mercy in this verse. "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." You know, the usual mercy was a small coin or a bit of bread. But these lepers had heard tales of Jesus' miracles. They didn't want a small mercy. They wanted a big mercy, didn't they? They wanted healing. They wanted to be made whole. They wanted Jesus to restore their life. Luke says in verse 14 that when he saw them, he being Jesus, and you know, that's a small detail which we must not overlook because Jesus saw those lepers. We tend not to see lepers, do we? Sick people, or people without hope, homeless people, dying people. Someone once did a study of hospital traffic patterns and found that as a patient was dying, doctors and nurses visited less and less frequently. Family members visited less and less frequently. And you know, I can understand that. It's just too painful to look into the face of death knowing that you can't chase death out the door. But Jesus saw these lepers. He didn't avert his eyes like most people. He just didn't toss them a coin and hurry on his way. He saw them. And Jesus answered the request in a way that seems strange. Unless you know the story of Naaman in the Old Testament. Y'all know about Naaman? Let me bring you up to speed on that story. We're going to go back and look at 2 Kings chapter 5. Naaman was a great general, the king's right-hand man. But Naaman was also a leper. The servant girl suggested to Naaman's wife that Elisha, the man of God, could heal her husband. So Naaman loaded up and went to see Elisha. However, instead of healing Naaman, Elisha told him to go bathe in the river Jordan 7 times. Now Naaman was insulted. If he wanted to bathe in a river, they had plenty of rivers back where he came from. He didn't make this long trip just to be told to go take a bath in the river Jordan. But one of Naaman's servants came to him with this plea, and the servant said, "My father, if the prophet had asked you to do some great thing, wouldn't you have done it? How much more then when he tells you, wash and be clean?" You know, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could all have servants like that? Someone who could help us to see the folly of our ways before we jumped. Naaman's servant did it so nicely. He just said, if he had told you to do something hard, you would have done it. But he just told you to go do something easy. Why not give it a chance? What do you got to lose? So Naaman went down to the river and washed himself 7 times. And the Bible says his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Can you imagine that? Naaman bathed once, nothing happened. He bathed twice, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, and nothing happened. And then he bathed one more time, as the man of God had instructed him, and boom, he was clean. Naaman, overjoyed, he returned to Elisha and gave thanks, and he praised God. And he said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel, so please accept a gift from your servant." And you know, in like manner, Jesus told these 10 lepers to step out in faith. Jesus didn't heal them. He just told them to present themselves to the priests. And remember, priests were leprosy inspectors. They were responsible for determining whether a person had leprosy or not, whether they could return to their families or not. By telling these lepers to go to the priest, Jesus was saying in effect that they should start their journey, knowing that they had not yet been healed, but having faith that they would be healed before they arrived at the priest's doorstep. It was a small thing which Jesus told the lepers to do, to walk away from him and to go to the priest. But it was also a great thing. These men had lived without hope for so long. Now, instead of healing them, Jesus told them to leave, to go away as if they have been healed, to step out in faith that they would be healed. They did just what Jesus told them to do, and it happened. Luke says in 14, as they went, they were cleansed. Wow, my friend, cleansed, made whole. It's amazing. Jesus calls us to that same kind of step out in faith kind of faith. He calls us every day to do little things in faith, expecting that God will do right by us. He calls us to do little things, like helping someone who needs help, like loving our neighbor, like taking our kids to church, like tithing. You know, it might be easier if Jesus told us to do something hard. When Elisha told Naaman to bathe in the river Jordan, it kind of made Naaman angry. "We have better rivers than this back home," Naaman said. But Naaman's loyal servant had it right when he said, "My father, if the prophet had asked you to do something great, wouldn't you have done it? How much more then when he tells you, wash and be clean?" So Naaman went down to the Jordan and washed himself, and his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. It might have been easier for the lepers if Jesus had given them a difficult assignment, something commensurate with the great blessing that they were asking. They might have found it easier to believe Jesus if he had told them to crawl on their hands and knees to the temple and bow before the priest. But instead, Jesus just said, go show yourself to the priest. Jesus hadn't healed the lepers, but he asked them to take a small step of faith to show their belief that they would, to show their belief that he would heal them. They took that step. And as they went, they were cleansed. You know, it might be easier for us if Jesus made it harder for us. If he gave us a tremendous challenge. Instead, Jesus calls us to step out in faith in 1,000 little ways, doesn't he? And that's not easy. If it's difficult to do something great for Jesus, it's sometimes even more difficult to do ordinary things for Jesus day by day. The late preacher Fred Craddock, he put it this way. He said, to give my life for Christ appears glorious. To pour myself out for others, to pay the ultimate price of martyrdom, I'll do it. I'm ready, Lord, to go out in a blaze of glory. We think that giving our all to the Lord is like taking $1,000 bill and laying it on the table. Here's my life, Lord. I'm giving it all. But the reality for most of us is that God sends us to the bank, and he has us cash in that $1,000 bill for quarters, and we go through life putting out 25 cents here and 50 cents there, listening to the neighbor's kids' troubles instead of saying, get lost, going to a committee meeting, giving a cup of water to a shaky old man in a nursing home. Usually giving our life to Christ isn't glorious. It's done in all those little acts of love, 25 cents at a time. It would be easy to go out in a flash of glory. It's harder to live the Christian life little by little over the long haul. So let's look for little ways to be faithful to Jesus this week. Show a kindness to someone that you would usually pass by. Set aside a few minutes to read the scriptures and pray. Examine your heart to find something dark that you should give up. Re-examine your stewardship to see if you are doing what you should. Something easy for all of us. Invite someone to come to church. And if you will make a habit of doing these little things for Christ, he will use those little things to whittle the sharp edges from your life. He will use them to reshape your heart and your thinking. He will make it possible for you to love the unlovely, and he will bless your life. But that will only happen when you step out on faith. Step out in faith. When you begin to obey Jesus in some little things. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.